In 2006, APOCALYPTO shocked the world with its brutal violence and relentless fight for survival. But when the film ended, the real stories were just beginning. Nearly 20 years later, the cast's lives have taken dark, unexpected turns, fatal accidents, shattered marriages, and sudden deaths no one saw coming. This is APOCALYPTO, 2006. Cast then and now, 2026. Rudy Youngblood as Jaguar Paw. Rudy Youngblood was born on September 21, 1982 in Belton, Texas. At 24 years old, he played Jaguar Paw, the determined hunter and father fighting to survive in APOCALYPTO, 2006. The role shaped the film's emotional core, as his near-silent performance carried fear, endurance, and hope through every brutal sequence. That intensity did not come from training alone. Growing up in an unstable household, Rudy took on responsibility early, helping care for his two younger sisters while his mother struggled with alcoholism. Physical work and discipline filled the gaps left by instability, and by the time acting arrived, survival already felt familiar. When he later appeared in films such as Beat Down and Windwalkers, that same hardened presence followed him on screen. The sudden fame from APOCALYPTO created momentum, but not security. Career opportunities arrived unevenly, and without a stable personal life to anchor him, relationships quietly unraveled. Rudy never married, and emotional distance became a recurring pattern as work slowed and expectations faded, even while he continued accepting physically demanding roles. As professional structure weakened, personal control followed. Alcohol increasingly shaped his routine, and the contrast between his disciplined screen persona and real life grew sharper. This collapse surfaced publicly in late 2024 in Athens, where an alcohol-fueled confrontation with police ended in arrest, marking a painful rupture between who he had been and who he had become. Today, Rudy Youngblood is 43 years old, living far from Hollywood's center. He focuses on indigenous music, cultural projects, and HIV/AIDS awareness work tied to family loss, choosing purpose over visibility. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, his life now reflects endurance rather than ascent, shaped by the long aftermath of a role that once defined him. Dalia Hernandez as 7. Dalia Hernandez was born on August 14, 1985 in Veracruz, Mexico. At 21 years old, she played 7, the young woman caught between love and violence in APOCALYPTO, 2006. Her controlled, restrained presence softened the film's brutality, giving emotional weight to scenes defined by fear and loss. Her resilience was shaped early by economic hardship and limited opportunity. Raised in rural Veracruz, Dalia entered responsibility young and relied on discipline rather than privilege to move forward. Dance and formal study became her foundation, and after APOCALYPTO, she continued building credibility through projects such as La Zona and later The Legend of the Mask, proving her range beyond a single breakout role. Professional recognition, however, did not guarantee stability. Dalia married and became a mother. Family life brought fulfillment alongside strain, as inconsistent work made balance difficult. While films like Miracle Underground kept her active, long gaps between projects placed quiet pressure on both career and home life. Over time, exhaustion replaced momentum. Demanding shoots, uncertainty, and the absence of sustained leading roles gradually pulled her away from mainstream cinema. Rather than forcing visibility, she redirected her energy towards smaller productions and cultural storytelling, allowing distance to restore control. Now, Dalia Hernandez is 41 years old, working selectively in independent Mexican film and community arts initiatives. With an estimated net worth of around $500,000, her career stands as a story of persistence without spectacle, defined not by constant exposure, but by the decision to endure on her own terms. Raul Trujillo as Zero Wolf. Raul Trujillo was born on May 8, 1955, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, At 51 years old, he played Zero Wolf, the ruthless Mayan slave catcher and primary antagonist in Apocalypto, 2006. His performance gave the film its most terrifying presence, a villain whose calm cruelty sharpened every act of violence and raised the stakes of Jaguar Paw's escape. That intensity grew out of a childhood shaped by complexity rather than comfort. Raised within a mixed indigenous and European heritage, Trujillo faced constant tension around identity, belonging, and visibility, pressures that followed him into adulthood. Seeking structure, he entered the military, then drifted through physically demanding work before committing fully to dance and performance, a discipline that would later define his authority on screen in projects like Black Robe and The New World. Long before Hollywood recognized him, Trujillo built a parallel life in theater and dance. Years as a soloist with the Nicolai's Dance Theater and as co-director of the American Indian Dance Theater gave him artistic control but little financial certainty. When film roles arrived, such as Riddick and Sicario, they demanded long shoots and physical endurance, reinforcing a career pattern built on intensity rather than comfort. His personal life carried similar strain. Trujillo married Jessica Hunsden Carey in 2006, the same year Apocalypto was released, and the couple had one child before divorcing in 2011. The end of the marriage coincided with relentless work schedules and emotional distance, leaving him to navigate fatherhood alongside an industry that rarely slowed down. Today, Raul Trujillo is 71 years old, still active as an actor, choreographer, and mentor, most recently recognized for his long-running role on Mayan's MC. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, built across more than 4 decades of film, television, and stage work, his life reflects endurance. Jonathan Brewer as Blunted. Jonathan Brewer was born on April 15, 1977, in Cardston, Alberta, Canada. At 23 years old, he played Blunted, the brutal and impulsive warrior in Apocalypto, 2006. Though not the lead, his character embodied the film's raw savagery, reinforcing the constant threat that surrounded every moment of captivity. Brewer's early years were marked by hardship on the Kainai Nation, where poverty and limited opportunity shaped daily life. Raised within the Blackfeet community, he grew up aware that paths out were narrow and unforgiving. Acting began as practical work rather than ambition, but early roles in productions like Dreamkeeper gave him a first glimpse of possibility beyond the reserve. That promise, however, proved fragile. After Apocalypto, roles arrived sporadically, often in television films or supporting parts such as Journey to the Center of the Earth and Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Without sustained momentum, Brewer faced the familiar struggle of indigenous actors. Each gap between projects widened the distance from mainstream cinema, turning acting into intermittent work rather than a stable career. Today, Jonathan Brewer is 49 years old, living largely outside the spotlight and working selectively within film and community-based projects. With an estimated net worth of around $300,000, his story stands as one of quiet resilience. Gerardo Taracena as Middle Eye. Gerardo Taracena was born in 1970 in Mexico City, Mexico. At 36 years old, he played Middle Eye, the fierce and calculating warrior within Zero Wolf's hunting party in Apocalypto, 2006. His performance sharpened the film's sense of danger, adding intelligence and cruelty to the violence rather than raw brutality alone. That controlled menace was shaped by a demanding early life in one of Latin America's most crowded cities. Growing up amid financial strain and academic pressure, Taracena gravitated toward discipline as survival, studying theatrical arts at UNAM and immersing himself in rigorous stage training. Years of touring Latin America with dance and theater companies hardened his craft, helping him later visible in Man on Fire and The Mexican. When film opportunities expanded, they came with constant competition rather than comfort. After Apocalypto, Taracena moved between Mexican and U.S. productions, including Sin Nombre and Saving Private Perez, often cast in intense supporting roles that required physical and emotional precision. Each project built credibility but rarely offered stability, reinforcing a career defined by endurance instead of momentum. His personal life reflected similar strain. Taracena married, but balancing family life against relentless schedules and location-heavy shoots proved difficult, creating long periods of distance and tension at home. While his work on series like Narcos Mexico brought renewed visibility, it also demanded sustained separation, testing the limits of that balance. Now, Gerardo Taracena is 56 years old, continuing to work steadily in film and television across Mexico and international productions. With an estimated net worth of around $2 million, built through decades of stage, screen, and streaming work, his career stands as a portrait of persistence. Birdyellowhead as Flint Sky. Birdyellowhead was born around 1973 in Duffield, Alberta, Canada. At 33 years old, he played Flint Sky, the loyal tribesman bound by fear and tradition in APOCALYPTO, 2006. His grounded performance gave the film emotional contrast, reminding viewers that not every warrior was driven by cruelty alone. That restraint reflected a childhood shaped by scarcity and discrimination. Raised within the Paul First Nation, Morris grew up with limited opportunity and constant pressure to adapt to systems not built for him. Acting emerged gradually through regional projects, and early appearances in Into the West helped him step beyond local boundaries without losing his cultural grounding. After APOCALYPTO, momentum proved difficult to sustain. Roles came sporadically, often separated by long gaps, as seen between projects like Into the West and later Alpha. Each return to screen required starting again, reinforcing how fragile visibility can be for indigenous actors outside the mainstream system. Off-screen, Morris built a family-centered life away from cameras. Rather than chase unstable roles, he chose consistency, returning to his reserve and prioritizing responsibility over recognition as acting opportunities slowed. By 2026, Birdyellowhead is 53 years old, living on his reserve, raising his children, and working as an auto mechanic while remaining connected to film when opportunities arise. With an estimated net worth of around $500,000, his story is quietly devastating. Not a fall from fame, but a reminder that survival sometimes means choosing reality over the spotlight. Carlos Emilio Baez, as Turtles Run. Carlos Emilio Baez was born around 1996 in Mexico. At 10 years old, he played Turtles Run, the frightened but quick-witted village boy in APOCALYPTO, 2006. His presence gave the film rare innocence, a child's fear amplifying the brutality surrounding the adults. That innocence came at a cost. Working as a child actor under extreme conditions, Carlos faced long shooting days, physical exhaustion, and emotional pressure far beyond his age. The jungle setting, constant danger, and discipline required on set shaped his early years around survival rather than play, creating stress that followed him quietly into adolescence. After APOCALYPTO, expectations outweighed opportunities. Transitioning from a memorable child role to adult acting proved difficult, as casting doors narrowed instead of opening. Years later, his appearance in Wetico, 2022, marked a cautious return, showing how distant the path had become from the promise he once carried as a child on a global stage. Carlos never married, and his personal life remained largely private as he stepped in and out of acting. Without industry momentum or support systems often denied to child actors, his career unfolded in fragments rather than chapters, each gap reinforcing how fragile early fame can be. Today, Carlos Emilio Baez is 30 years old, living outside mainstream cinema and engaging selectively with creative projects. With an estimated net worth of around $100,000, his story is quietly painful. Amilkar Ramirez as Curl Nose. Amilkar Ramirez was born around 1975 in Mexico. At 31 years old, he played Curl-Nose, the aggressive and volatile warrior in Apocalypto, 2006. His character intensified the film's sense of unpredictability, embodying violence without restraint. That volatility echoed an upbringing shaped by urban hardship and psychological pressure. Growing up amid limited resources and constant stress, Amilkar learned early that stability was never guaranteed. Acting became an outlet rather than ambition, offering structure in a life marked by uncertainty. Apocalypto brought brief recognition, but not continuity. Unlike co-stars who secured steady follow-ups, Amilkar struggled to remain visible in a competitive industry with few roles arriving afterward. His career became defined almost entirely by that single film, a peak that proved impossible to sustain. In 2026, Amilkar Ramirez is 51 years old, living far from the spotlight. With an estimated net worth of around $200,000, his life reflects a harsh truth of cinema. Sometimes one powerful performance becomes both a legacy and a ceiling. Israel Contreras as Smoke Frog. Israel Contreras was born on December 27, 1960, in La Guaira, Venezuela. At 46 years old, he played Smoke Frog, the intimidating elder warrior whose presence radiates danger rather than speed in Apocalypto, 2006. Though a minor role, his physical gravity added realism to the film's violent hierarchy, grounding its warriors in lived toughness rather than cinematic illusion. That toughness was earned long before cinema. Contreras grew up amid economic hardship in Venezuela, where survival demanded resilience rather than choice. Boxing became his escape and discipline. In 1981, he climbed through boxing's brutal ranks and reached the world stage by winning the WBO bantamweight title in 1990, followed by the WBA World Championship in 1991. Years of title fights, knockouts, and relentless travel forged a reputation built on durability rather than finesse, the same quality later visible in his screen presence. That career, however, extracted its price. After losing his title in his first defense and suffering repeated physical punishment, Contreras collapsed in hospital following a 1995 TKO loss, an episode that abruptly ended his boxing life. Retirement closed one chapter but left lasting physical consequences, making Apocalypto not a reinvention, but a continuation, his body already telling a story of damage and survival without dialogue. Following the film, acting never became a stable second career. Limited roles and the challenges of relocation kept him on the margins of cinema, with Apocalypto standing as both his most visible screen credit and final public chapter. The transition from world champion to near anonymity unfolded quietly. Today, Israel Contreras is 66 years old, living far from the arenas and film sets that once defined him. With an estimated net worth of around $300,000, largely earned during his boxing peak rather than acting, his life reflects a harsh reality. Fame earned through physical sacrifice rarely guarantees security. Once the body, Iazua Larios, as Sky Flower. Iazua Larios was born in 1982 in Tampico, Mexico. At 24 years old, she played Sky Flower, the quiet woman whose endurance reflects the collective fate of her people in Apocalypto, 2006. Her restrained presence deepened the film's emotional weight, proving that silence could be as powerful as violence in shaping its tone. Rather than a dramatic origin story, her early path moved quickly into professional discipline. She committed to acting and performance training at a young age, entering a competitive field that demanded precision and restraint. Before and after Apocalypto, she reinforced her credibility through projects such as El Atentado and Drops of Rocio, roles that emphasized internal tension over spectacle and prepared her for international work. The global attention surrounding Apocalypto opened doors, but it also narrowed expectations. Larios found herself repeatedly navigating limited casting opportunities, pushing her to seek variety across film and television. appearances in El Cesar and later Sitiados. Mexico kept her active while highlighting the ongoing challenge of sustaining momentum without being absorbed by a single defining role. As her career matured, endurance became the through line. Long gaps between projects, shifts between markets, and the pressure to remain visible without overexposure shaped a quieter professional rhythm. European productions such as Winnetou and Old Shatterhand and The Treasure of the Silver Lake marked a turning point, bringing her work to a wider audience and achieving notable success in Germany. Now, Iazua Larios is 44 years old, continuing to work selectively across Mexican and international productions. With an estimated net worth of around $500,000, built steadily rather than suddenly, her story is one of persistence, an actress who survived the aftermath of a global hit by choosing longevity over noise and control over collapse. Mayra Serbulo, as young woman, Mayra. Serbulo was born on January 13, 1970, in Oaxaca, Mexico. At 36 years old, she played young woman, a central female presence whose suffering and endurance humanized the film's violence in APOCALYPTO, 2006. The role elevated the emotional stakes of the story and became the performance that carried her to international recognition. Her professional path was built through craft and consistency rather than sudden discovery. Trained in theater and performance in Oaxaca and later Mexico City, Serbulo accumulated screen credibility through films such as The Mexican and Y Tu Mamá También, learning to navigate international sets while remaining rooted in Mexican cinema. By the time APOCALYPTO arrived, she was already a seasoned performer capable of sustaining intensity without excess. Global visibility brought new pressure. Serbulo married and continued working across film, television, and stage, but balancing a demanding career with family life proved difficult as casting frequently funneled her into narrowly defined indigenous roles. Even as opportunities expanded, the effort required to maintain momentum placed strain on personal stability, turning success into a constant negotiation rather than relief. Instead of retreating, she deepened her artistic range. Performances in Spiral and later stage work, like the acclaimed monologue Todos Santos, demonstrated control and maturity, while television appearances kept her visible to new audiences. Each project reinforced her reputation as an actress of emotional weight, even when industry trends shifted away from character-driven roles. Today, Mayra Serbulo is 56 years old, continuing to work steadily across theater, television, and film in Mexico and abroad. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, earned over more than 2 decades of sustained work, her career stands as a testament to endurance. Israel Rios as Coco Leaf. Israel Rios was born around 1968 in Mexico. At 38 years old, he played Coco Leaf, the seasoned tribesman moving in the shadow of violence in APOCALYPTO. His restrained, watchful presence added weight to the hunting party, reinforcing the idea that danger in the film did not come only from brutal leaders, but also from the men who quietly carried out their will. Unlike many actors who arrive through long resumes, Rios's path to the film was narrow and demanding. His selection relied less on prior screen recognition and more on physical readiness, discipline, and the ability to communicate through silence. APOCALYPTO required endurance, pain tolerance, and emotional control, placing him inside an unforgiving production that offered visibility without protection. When the film reached global audiences, the exposure was sudden and immense, but it did not translate into continuity. Few roles followed, and the momentum that audiences assumed would build simply never came. APOCALYPTO became both his breakthrough and his ceiling, a single defining credit that froze his public identity in one moment of cinematic history. As opportunities faded, Rios gradually stepped away from acting. Professional life moved beyond the camera, shaped by practicality rather than ambition. The industry that briefly placed him on an international stage offered little room to remain, a familiar outcome for performers whose careers hinge on one monumental role. Now, 58 years old, Israel Rios lives outside the film industry that once brought him worldwide recognition. With an estimated net worth of around $200,000, largely connected to his work on APOCALYPTO, his story reflects a quieter truth of cinema. Sometimes a single role lasts forever, even when the career behind it does not. Richard Kann as Ten Peccary. Richard Kann was born around 1973. At 33 years old, he played Ten Peccary, the alert and aggressive warrior within the raiding group in APOCALYPTO, 2006. Though not central to the narrative, his performance strengthened the film's constant tension, contributing to the feeling that threat surrounded every frame. His professional identity remains closely tied to that single production. APOCALYPTO required intense physicality and complete immersion, offering exposure on a global scale without guaranteeing continuity. The role placed Kann inside one of the most demanding film environments of the decade, but it did not open sustained doors afterward. Following the film, acting opportunities proved scarce. Without additional high-profile credits, APOCALYPTO remained his primary professional reference, and the distance between visibility and stability widened with time. What might have become a foundation instead became a fixed point. As years passed, the absence of consistent work shifted his trajectory away from cinema. Rather than a public fall, his career faded quietly, leaving behind a single performance etched into a film remembered for its extremity and scale. Today, Richard Kann is 53 years old, living far from the spotlight that briefly found him. With an estimated net worth of around $100,000, his life underscores a difficult truth. Being part of a legendary film does not always translate into a lasting place within the industry that created it. It's been nearly 2 decades since APOCALYPTO, 2006, shocked audiences with its raw power. But the real stories didn't end when the cameras stopped. Some of the cast carried that moment into long, demanding careers, while others faded quietly, their lives shaped by sacrifice, survival, and choices the spotlight never shows. So when you look back at APOCALYPTO then and now in 2026, which journey surprised you the most? And which one hurt the most to discover? If you want more deep, untold stories behind legendary films and their casts, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover what really happened after the credits rolled.